Bravo.
And first speaker is J.K. Canepa. If it wasn't for J.K., this event would not be taking place. She is absolutely tireless and wonderful in so many ways. If it wasn't for her, none of this would have come together. She worked harder than anyone else, and that includes the entire committee I think put together. So thank you, JK.
God, I don't know how to follow that one. But I want to start with, somebody took my notes. They were right here. Oh well, we'll wing it. First I want to start with an acknowledgement of my colleague Tim Keating, Rainforest Relief. He's the source of a lot of information about boardwalks and tropical timber and alternatives to that. And let's talk about boardwalks for a minute. Rainforest wood wasn't the original choice for boardwalks. We used to use southern Georgia yellow pine. That's what most of the boardwalks in the East Coast were made of over 100 years ago. But we logged out a lot of the pine and we moved on to Douglas fir. And we used a lot of Douglas fir, those great giants of the West. And then we were able to, through cheap fuel, we were able to import this extremely hard, beautiful, durable wood called ipe from the Amazon, the ancient 50, 60 million year old forests of the planet. Ipe is one of the emergent trees in the rainforest. It stands tall over the canopy. It looks down on the tops of the other trees. It flowers. It's quite beautiful. And the ipe tree grows about 1 per hectare. A hectare is about 2.4 acres. So imagine a city block in New York with 1 tree on it that you want to target. And the rest of the block is filled with dense forest. So a logging road has to be cut into the heart of the forest. The ipe trees are tall, they're shy, they don't stand at the edge of the forest, they're inside, and to get to the tree, the road has to be wide enough to carry these magnificent trees, or the logs of the trees, out. So 28 trees are sacrificed to get to 1 ipe. That's 1. And only the best part of that tree is used. So the rest of the tree lays on the forest floor or in the lumber yard, and it outgasses carbon dioxide. As the trees are pulled out on the sleds, they degrade the floor of the forest. And when the logging company, let's say the logging company that got the ipe was a certified company, it got Forest Stewardship Council certification, the highest level of certification you can get, in a very remote part of the world. And then the trees are harvested and the company leaves, packs up and leaves. The road is still there for wildcatters, for small illegal lumber harvesters to go in and take whatever they want. So this is the problem with using ipe on a boardwalk. In 2001, the very enlightened town council of Long Beach agreed to only use wood that was harvested in an environmentally sustainable way. And we were so grateful for that very enlightened approach. Unfortunately, disaster, crisis, the overwhelming damage done to the boardwalk by Hurricane Sandy, and the town wanted its boardwalk back. And sadly, Charles Schumer advocated that we replace the boardwalk of Long Beach with ipe. So, unfortunate choice. We have to consider that there will be more storms in the future. There will be more choices to make. And I want to have my friend Retta pass out one of the choices. It's called Cambia. It's a toasted hardwood from North America. It's toasted and it looks just like rainforest wood. There's also recycled plastic lumber, and that is so strong. We have handouts in the back on the red table. It's called Great Resources. On that page, there's a link to a video of a fully loaded tank crossing a bridge. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers contracted to have this bridge built out of recycled plastic lumber. So you can watch recycled plastic lumber in action. And what we advocated in New York City for Coney Island was to build the boardwalk of recycled plastic lumber and put a thin layer of some beautiful wood on top, but a thin layer of a local, sustainable, beautiful wood that local loggers and sawmill companies could make a living off of. So this was our approach. And next up is my friend Ken Gale. He's going to talk about the bigger picture. Deforestation is just part of that picture. The bigger picture of climate change. And Ken is the host of Ecologic Radio on WBAI FM in New York City.
Thank you, JK. Well, I want to start with how the deforestation of the tropical rainforest affects the climate here. Wind patterns, of course, drive the weather, and the weather drives the climate. Wind is caused by the uneven heating of the earth. Some parts of the earth absorb more of the sun's light than other, right? Ice and snow are going to reflect it. Dark water is going to absorb it. A forest is going to absorb it. A desert is going to reflect it. So all of that different ways that the earth is absorbing the sun's energy makes the air start to move. And then you add the rotation of the earth, and that makes even more movement. We all know that if the Pittsburgh Pirates are having a rainout, the Mets are going to have a rainout the next day because the weather is moving from there to here. We know that hurricanes start in Africa, and down there, the winds go from east to west. And the hurricanes start in Africa and hit Florida and the Gulf Coast. When you take away miles and miles of tropical forest, you are literally changing the wind patterns of the globe, because the earth is now going to be heating differently. And so the winds will be different. Now think about that, miles and miles. Now the Long Beach Boardwalk is 2.5 miles long. You have to deforest a lot more than that 2.5 miles to get to that wood. So there's miles and miles of tropical rainforest that were completely clear cut just to build that boardwalk. And of course the people being employed to do it, they don't necessarily live around these parts. We all know what happened with Sandy. And you started hearing politicians talking about global warming a little bit and climate change a little bit. And then they stopped talking about it. Part of the point of having town meetings like this, or shows like Ecologic, or all the different environmental groups that so many people here are working with, is to make people realize that everyday actions affect the climate. So the deforesting of the boardwalk to replace the boardwalk that Sandy destroyed is going to make the likelihood of replacing that boardwalk more likely, because climate change makes more hurricanes and it makes the ones we have worse. So they'd like to say you can't blame maybe one hurricane on climate change. Yeah. But you can blame some of them on climate change, and you can blame the strength, because when you heat the water through the global warming part of climate change, you are giving energy to those hurricanes. And that is what's going on. When you melt the polar ice cap, you are freeing moisture to the winds that go across the Arctic Ocean, so that once they get to land, they have a lot more snow they can deposit. When the Arctic ice cap is not melted, there's a barrier between the water and the wind. So the wind is drier and there's less snow. I interview a meteorologist named Tom Weissmuller on Ecologic at the beginning of every winter. And I asked him to tell us what the climate for the winter and spring will be like, how wet, how cold. He's been right 5 years in a row. And he explains it all. And he compares it to previous years. So if you're a long-time listener, you get a little extra rewarded. His show from November 26th is archived on the WBAI website, so any of you can hear it at your leisure. And he talked about the melting of the ice cap and how when you combine that with the El Nino, which is, again, and that's affected by destroying rainforest, just changing the way the currents work. Everything is connected. I'm an oceanography major, and while all the other sciences were real specialized, oceanography was very general, because chemical, physical, and biological oceanography are so tied in that the curriculum for those three branches of oceanography was identical pretty much for freshmen, sophomores, and juniors. That's how much of a general science oceanography actually is. So I've been trained to see the connections between what lives in the ocean, the weather patterns, the currents, the chemistry of everything that comes off of land. Everything is tied together. So the El Nino down near Ecuador, the deforestation in Brazil, the melting of the ice cap in the Arctic is all connected. It changes our weather patterns. And it's a very important consideration to make. And with Long Beach being such a nexus, right? They want to build a liquefied natural gas plant out there. They're talking about putting a wind farm out there. You've got the Boardwalk. You've got the effects of Sandy. You've got this dense population. When J.K. and I did the Halftime Howie show, we were up at the top of a hotel, and we got to look out over Long Beach. There's not a whole lot of room between the houses here. There's no place for the water to go. And that's a very important consideration. There's no place for the water to go. So you don't want there to be extra water. You don't want there to be sea level rise. You don't want the Greenland ice cap to be melting and adding to the oceanic water level. So now we'll take a few questions and answers until Sue Polo comes on. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to thank Shaheen Malik for that incredible cello. When we were putting this together, J.K. said, he's really good. I'm like, okay, you know, wow, he's really good.
Not only that, but he comes with a speaker, his mother.
So anyway, let's take questions.
Thank you very much, J.K. and Ken. It's not actually a question, but I just wanted to point out that also, as the waters heat up from global warming, it expands. In other words, an ocean that is cooler is not as high. The sea level will be less high than an ocean that is warm. So not only does the global warming intensify the strength of the hurricane, it also makes the sea level higher because it's a warmer ocean. So I just kind of wanted to point that out. And I don't know if this is a question you want to address now, but what do you think that we might say to anyone who is still questioning global warming? Thank you.
J.K. wants to know if there's anybody here who's still questioning global warming or climate change. I thought not. It depends on the person, of course. Some people are not going to listen to reason. They have decided that the climate change people are the enemy and the people who deny it are on their side. And however they pick their sides, yeah, you'd have to know them as an individual to know, how did you pick that side?
Right on my scooter.
But the consensus of people who actually study this stuff, not the people who talk about it, the people who study it, is that it's going faster. A few years ago is when the International Polar Year was, which it was actually 2 years, but they call it the Polar Year like it was one. It was 2 years long. And they would make these models trying to predict what the effects of climate change would be. And every time they would make a model, they would test the model by sort of going, well, okay, let's use these criteria from a few years ago to see if we're right for this year, because we asked what we had the data for, and then that'll be our model predicting for next year. And every time they did that, when next year happened, the temperature of the Earth was worse, the sea level rise was higher, there were a lot more problems, so they would redo the models, because now they have more data, right? And that's one of the cool things about science, is as you learn, you change your model. So they would change the model and work it out, and next year it was worse. And when I started Ecologic in 2002, a lot of scientists were like, I know stuff, and I have something to tell you, and after a few years, they're like, I know stuff and nobody's listening. And it was weird to hear scientists who've been teaching or in labs for decades sound scared. because they knew what was going on with the entire planet, and it didn't look good. And one person was talking about the end of Western civilization as we know it. So I was kind of, during the Q&A, I'm like, well, if Western civilization caused this, does it deserve to stay around as we know it? And he's like, I like Western civilization. I don't want it to go away. And that was his whole point for studying it, his whole point for going to forums, his whole point to talking to people like us. The people who study climate know what's going on. It's the people who don't study it and don't want to study it that want to bury themselves from what's going on.
Well, I think that that's the human condition, that when we're faced with the intolerable, the unthinkable, we don't remain there. It's like grief. Grief has a process and then it ends. The grief of what's happening is so great that we who do know what's happening and who understand and want to do something about it, we have to be there for those who are trying to come to terms with it and trying to rationalize their way out of it and trying to picture that it's not going to happen to them or their children or their children's children. We have to find ways to reach people. That's one of the reasons we called the town hall. We wanted the town to come and ask their questions and have a real exchange. So, any other questions? Come up.
Hi, Jay Blackman. I don't know if this is exactly on topic, but I noticed coming across the Loop Parkway at the base of Lido Boulevard, there's one lone wind turbine. What is that? Is that a demonstration, or are they planning to build more?
Long Beach, can you answer him?
David, do you know?
Town of Hempstead.
It is a demonstration project, and there's a plan for more offshore wind farms.
It's a demonstration project.
Yeah, it was the town of Hempstead did, along with, they have solar installations there. George knows a lot about this actually. So you can catch him afterwards to know about that project specifically. And then later I'll talk about the offshore wind project.
Well, I've been to the conference at Stony Brook.
Oh, okay.
They were talking about just that.
Yeah.
About offshore of Long Island, there's the strongest winds of the entire country right there. So
Yeah,
sounds good.
there's a real potential
I
here.
was just hoping that they were, planning more stuff for around here.
We'll be talking about, of course, the natural gas plant and fracking and pipelines, but we'll be talking about wind and solar as solutions to these problems. And we have two speakers who will be giving us that at the end.
I think you can hear me from here. I was naive enough and foolish enough to believe the story that was told that this was sustainable wood that they were building at Boardwalk out of. I live in Long Beach, right on the Boardwalk. I kind of feel like my building and us building on the Boardwalk was nature, and the flood we had from it was nature's way of saying, I told you not to do it. But in any case, we did. I lived there. I didn't build it personally, but I heard that this was sustainable wood.
Well, there's
Well,
two.
not so right
Yeah.
now. And I never quite believed it, but the voice of reason said to me, well, they gave this to me and said that. It was a good story.
There's two kinds of certification. There's a chain of custody where you can trace it went from here to the sawmill, to the ship, to the this, to the that, chain of custody. And then there's the actual certification of how the wood was logged. And so the town did not, I shouldn't say the town, you're the town.
We don't need to blame anybody, but
No.
that sold the bill of goods.
Yeah.
Mine.
It happens. It happened on the High Line too in Manhattan, and we pointed out to the Friends of High Line folks that the first leg of the High Line, they were sold a bill of goods. They got some kind of certification thing that didn't trace back to the original forest, and so the second leg they built out of they reclaimed teak instead of using epay. So yeah, it's a shell game, like fracking is a shell game, like LNG is a shell game. There's a lot of them, and it's too bad. But we have a lot of work to do, so now we know.
We wish we had heard what it was before, so we could have said something then. If indeed it would have helped, I don't know. I'm willing to open my mouth whether I win or not. I have to be heard.
We have a big project to stop in Long Beach now, and
I know.
you're going to help.
Who sold the wood?
Who sold the wood? Timber Holdings was the company that sold the wood to Long Beach.
American?
You know, my notes disappeared. I don't remember if they're Canadian or American. I can't remember.
From Brazil.
But the wood is from Brazil.
The wood is from Brazil. We live in a global world, though. You know, companies don't have one home. Anybody else? Edie.
Yeah, Ken, I was wondering if you could just describe a little about the polar vortex, because I think some people get confused when they see how cold it's been in North America recently, and I think this is good, especially when we're talking to other people, you know, who have their doubts or their objections to climate change.
Love to. Tom Weissmuller in November predicted the polar vortex before it happened. And he mentioned that there's always that high that goes over the poles, and that it was going to expand this winter, and it was going to be huge. And that's an effect of the melting of the polar ice cap, the albedo of the Earth, and the El Nino. Albedo is something that Tom has been talking about for years and years and years. And when I first had him on my show, 2004 or something like that, not too many people talked about albedo. Albedo is the reflectivity of the Earth, the actual globe of the Earth, to the sun's radiation. If you think about you know, a white car in the summer being not as hot as a black car in the summer, that's an aspect of it. White reflects energy and black absorbs it, and colors in between. When the ice cap melts, and there's all that moisture I mentioned earlier, if anybody knows someone in Buffalo or Erie, Pennsylvania, or Syracuse, you'll hear them talk about lake effect snow. In lake effect snow, same thing, right? When there's no ice on the lake, the winds go over the lake, grab moisture, deposit it. And so like in Rochester, New York, they'll talk about 18 inches north of the thruway, 6 inches south of the thruway. That's lake effect snow, north of the thruway. And so when you have all that moisture and more snow, and then you have an El Nino, which makes the jet stream have a big curve to it. Instead of being sort of undulating, there's a big curve, and that jet stream will bring that moisture from the Arctic south. And so more of Canada and the United States and more of Europe and more of Asia gets covered by snow. Snow reflects the sun's energy. That raises the albedo of the Earth, and that makes the polar vortex bigger. And that's what's going on. It's really that simple. And in the years I've known Tom, I've seen more and more climatologists address albedo as a major aspect of climate change. They used to go, well, yeah, it's got an effect, but not that much. And Tom was like, it's got a big effect. And they're all coming in Tom's way. I feel like I've discovered somebody.
Yeah. I am getting emails from a science researcher who studies maps from Europe and here and Canadian weather maps. And if you want to get on his email list, he predicted Sandy would make a left turn towards New York 2 weeks before it happened, and he predicted the last 5 out of 6 snowstorms here. Pretty close accuracy, like a week and a half in advance. If you want his email, it's jbrunetti at nyx.com, and if anybody wants to, I'll spell it out.
Yeah, so
Go ahead. at nyx.com.
You know, we have a resource list back on that table. It's full of really, really interesting links. And maybe you can send Ken, he's going to post that resource list on his website, comicbookradioshow.com, for reasons he might want to explain. And you can add that to his list. And that way anybody wants to get the information that we're quoting today and intriguing and channelizing things that we're talking to you about, you can take that resource list and Ken's link is on there.
And Tom Weissmuller's link is on there too, the meteorologist we have been talking about.
Yeah, it's a way to stay in touch.
This is not really a question. This is just, you know, when I tried to think about how all-encompassing the end of civilization, our civilization would be. And I thought, you know, how can people understand that and how can I understand it? And then it occurred to me, well, we can't understand it unless it's tied to something we already know. And I just wondered how many people here have had a experience, gone through a blackout, a power blackout? Yeah, right, yeah. And the disasters that we've experienced have an end. But the end of our civilization would be a blackout that goes on forever.
Sue Polo is someone I've been listening to for years. I've never had a chance to introduce her at an event, and you're in for a treat. Sue Polo.
You can see the long distance You can see the long distance. You can see the long distance out your window view. Clouds are silver and the sun is gold. Oh, the clouds are silver and the sun is gold. There's still so much to do. Some of the world is about hard times, some not affected at all. Some of the world is about good times, and some of the world is stumble and fall, stumble and fall. Don't worry now, you'll do alright. You can see the long distance. You can see the long distance. You can see the long distance in the morning light. In the morning light. Thank you.
Right. My songs are mostly about how beautiful the earth is, so I hope that that's environmentally correct thing to sing about. There are for more than against anything. I think it's always great to look for what's beautiful in the world. I usually play this on guitar. I don't usually play this on dulcimer, so I'm giving it a try on the dulcimer.
Woke up in the morning, stepped into my books, set out on the trail, going over such roots of trees that have been there for hundreds of years. You can hear the woods calling, lay down all your fears. You can hear the woods calling, lay down all your fears. Walk deep in the forest where giants still roam. Find all the small creatures calling wilderness home. How sweet the pine needles and the fresh morning dew. Waters that run here will always renew. The waters that run here will always renew. So wake up in the morning, roll out of your bed, let wind song and bird song get into your head. Climb up to the mountain and breathe in the view. Visions that run here will